Patch 1.50 of Granblue Fantasy vs. Rising has finally dropped, and this is easily the most anticipated balance patch that the game has seen in its lifespan. 8 months in, we're finally getting a comprehensive rebalancing of the entire cast of characters, as well as a couple additional system mechanic changes that I think will have large impacts into the overall game flow of Granblue Fantasy vs. Rising. I'm CD Mangaka, a Colorado-based TO that is going to be going through the entire list of patch notes and giving a visual example and guide to all the changes that have been done in this version of the game so we can see the before and after impacts on all of the characters as well as the system mechanics. Because this patch is so large, I'm not going to be doing this in one video. It's going to be a series of videos with them focused on particular topics, namely the characters themselves, because there's been a lot of changes to the characters, and I feel like the best way to organize this video is to just break it up into each individual character things and try and make it as comprehensive for each character as possible to demonstrate how they are going to be shifting in terms of their own power level within the game going into this brand new patch. Before we get into things, I wanted to break down the setup that we're going to be using as well as the visual format to organize the information that we're going to be discussing. When we are on the Didroit belt map, we are going to be playing with the new patch. That is Siegfried's new fireball. With the unpatched PlayStation 4 Pro that I have at my feet, we're going to be using the Port Breeze Archipelago map to demonstrate the previous patch and its behaviors. That is Siegfried's old fireball. As you can see, it lasts far longer and traveled a little slower. This is just for a visual example. Without further ado, let's discuss the system mechanic changes that have happened in patch 1.5. Most of the system mechanic changes in this patch have to do with damage scaling from very common starters or situations that you will see at high-level play in Granblue Fantasy vs. Rising. Let's go over the 6-6L changes first, or dash light attack changes. The first change of 6-6L is actually a bit of a functional buff applied to the entire cast. Everyone can now chain a close medium slash from a 6-6L at close range. In the old patch, you would probably get this result with a lot of characters, though some were able to do it, and especially based on the situations. This led to a discrepancy where some characters were able to get more rewards off of a 6-6L than others. This is how the situation will play out in the new patch. For those of you who might be freaking out that 6-6L just got buffed, which is largely regarded as a system mechanic that most people want gutted to the ground, hold your horses, there are some other changes to unpack with 6-6L as well. And don't forget, this is something that is applied universally to the cast so that every character has access to this same pressure sequence and tool. On block, you can get basic built-in frame traps from it as well. If I make Gran block the first hit, attempt to counter all with a standing light, you now effectively have auto-time frame traps with the entire cast. But also think about this too. Because of this, you are incentivized in a way to go for consistent triple attack sequences. This can mean that you give up looping the 6-6Ls and go for a more definitive end to your offense. I think it'll be interesting to see how players play around this in terms of their block sequences and how that changes how the game overall is played. We'll still see, though, again, chaining lights together to stay plus on block and then going into 6-6L to reset pressure will still be strong. But there is another change to consider with 6-6L, and that is to its damage scaling. The second change to 6-6L is to its damage scaling as a combo starter. When it's used to start a combo, it now counts as the second hit of a combo, meaning that the next hit scales as if it were the third hit. The best way to really demonstrate this is just to give you a head-to-head example and a ballpark figure of times. This is a short sequence that Siegfried could potentially do from a 6-6L without any resources. In the old patch, you could get 3,200 damage. Pretty alright, I'd say. This is how the same combo scales in the current patch. 2,700 damage. Overall, a loss of about 500 damage from this starter. This has a lot of small implications to the overall flow of the game. Hitting a raw 6-6L isn't as rewarding as it was before. This means that you're not able to snowball as quickly from raw 6-6L hits, and that the enemy will have more opportunities to make comeback and plays, and also not fear getting hit by 6-6L as much as they used to before. 6-6L will still be a strong tool, but I think that it's going to be stronger against an opponent that blocks it rather than an opponent who gets hit by it raw, especially with the numerous buffs that we see to many characters' other dash attacks in this patch. A similar damage scaling has been applied to a couple other system mechanics as well. The first one we'll talk about being Raging Strike. Any Raging Chain that's performed after the second hit of a combo now has 50% damage scaling. This means that if you're going for a couple options, like let's say fuzzy mashing and doing Raging Strike, to option select between a Brave counter and the Raging Strike and Chain to convert from your mash, you're going to get a lot less rewards here. In the old patch, Siegfried could go and get like 2 5Ls together on a mash and then go into Raging Strike and get 4,950 damage from mashing on defense and being right in calling out an opponent's gap. This is what the combo damage looks like from the same situation. It's 4,520 damage, so overall a loss of around 400 damage for Siegfried in this situation here. It is a subtle change, but still it's one that will have a knock-on effect because combos or sequences that would have killed before all of a sudden don't, and the opponent has one last interaction to play with before you can close out the round. With another moment of testing, you can actually understand this change even further, where basically this is going to gut any route that used to just throw in a Raging Strike and Chain to maximize damage before. When the Raging Chain is applied, it's if the Raging Chain is the second hit of a combo, not the Raging Strike. Check this out. If Siegfried starts his combo with a single light normal, the combo scaling that's applied in the patch notes also applies to his follow-up combo, even if he does one hit and then Raging Strike and Raging Chain. Before, you could get 5,230. Now let's check the same combo in the current patch. It's almost a loss of 900 damage from these situations. It's a pretty big discrepancy. Defensive mashing leading into a Raging Strike and Chain to option select is weaker than it was before, meaning that defensive mashing is overall weaker. This does also impact characters who like to add in a Raging Strike and Chain to get free follow-ups before as well. So overall, I feel like this kind of pushes spending your Brave points more towards the side of the already powerful Brave counter mechanic and away from using it for combo conversions. Of course, another knock-on effect of this is that this severely reduces the damage that you get from very simple combos that involve spending all of your Brave points on Raging Chain after Raging Chain. Compare the damage difference here. 7,150 in the previous patch. And here's how the damage looks now with the current scaling. $5,970. We went from going over 7,000 to not even breaking 6,000. Don't get me wrong, the damage is still high, but it is reduced overall, and this might mean that some other character combo routes might be competing against this option just due to the new scaling that is being applied. It is something that is going to have to be mapped out for each individual character before we fully understand where we actually want to be spending these Brave points on Raging Strikes and Chains as combo extensions. We still might want to do that just for the corner carry alone, but it feels like Cygames and Arxis want us to use it more as a guard break style of mechanic instead of this ability to extend combos for crazy high amounts of damage. Some characters will be feeling this a lot more than others, but certainly it's a mechanic that is going to be less favorable going forward with some of the other changes that have also been applied to the entire cast. Another system mechanic change that is technically applied universally, but really only counts as character specifically, is to jump attacks. If you perform a jump attack during an ascension of a jump or a high jump, it counts as the third hit, so it scales the combo even harder than the changes we discussed with 66L. This namely is only applied to characters that used fuzzies before, and Grimnir is a textbook example of that. Very crudely, I have recreated some of these setups that he can do to you in a game to go for fuzzies, and we can briefly look at a short comparison in terms of the damage he gets for this mix-up. So obviously Grimnir can do more here, but we should note that the benchmark once he gets into his EX Fireball is going to be 3,670 damage from a fuzzy overhead. And this is what the damage looks like now for Grimnir off of his fuzzy overhead. As you can see, it's a dramatic loss in terms of damage, with about 1,100 damage missing at the first bit of the combo. That's probably about the maximum range that we get, since the scaling does eventually just hit a nil point, and most of the damage you lose is up front at this point. But this is something to just note. Characters that would use these mix-ups aren't going to be as reliant on them anymore, just because they're not as rewarding. It is kind of a shame to see this happen, in my opinion. Granted, Granblue didn't have a lot of characters that would use this tactic overall, but now a character like Grimnir is disincentivized from going for this just because it isn't as rewarding as running like the universal strike throw mix-ups that I think you're going to see most of the other casts do. It is still a tool that he has, but maybe not one that you're as inclined to focus on anymore. Ultimate skills as combo starters also had similar scaling nerfs applied to them. This is namely going to affect characters that would use ultimate skills to win a neutral interaction and then convert it into massive damage. A character like Zeta comes to mind, though certainly there are others. Let's go ahead and demonstrate examples of her damage scaling before and after. This is the before patch. With a very unoptimal finisher, you can get 5,150. I apologize, I do not play this character, and her routes are going to be a little bit different with a couple other changes that happen to her kit, so I'm not going to invest that time into learning them. But you have the idea here with what the damage used to look like. Here's what her combo scaling looks like now in the current patch. Again, with a very unoptimal finisher, we are losing around 1,100 damage in comparison to the previous route before. This kind of all ties things together in a way where I think the best way to summarize it is that Cygames and Arxis didn't want to nerf the effectiveness of the strong tools that characters had, but rather nerf the reward that these tools could give a character, meaning that you're less likely to snowball and get a huge chunk of damage just from throwing out a random special move or choosing to use an OS on defense. It's going to slow the pace of the game down quite a bit, which I think overall is a buff to low health characters, as well as to characters who want to charge up over time to access their full potential within their toolkit. Very interesting to see how all these changes sort of come together to define what the meta is going to look like going forward for Granblue. One last thing to note about ultimate skills is that when you do use them to start off a combo, the SBA gauge will fill more slowly during that combo. That change, as well as the damage scaling change, only apply when you start a combo with an ultimate skill. So again, characters that would use an ultimate skill to try and skip neutral and then get high damage rewards for going for that option are going to see a nerf, whereas other characters who largely use ultimate skill to extend combos aren't going to be feeling the impact of that change. Obviously, characters that still want to use ultimate skills as a way to contest neutral and try and get reward from it will still want to. They're just not going to be able to snowball the game as hard from that hit. The last thing to be changed in terms of system mechanic damage scaling is from Skybound arts and Super Skybound arts as combo starters. If you use a super to start off a combo, it now has increased scaling, being treated as if it was the third hit of a combo. This is largely a small use case for some characters. A very obvious example that comes to mind is Vera with her install super. You can check out the damage scaling differences here. Great. She can get up to about 3,690 from that particular sequence. There's plenty more that she can do, of course, but let's compare that sequence to how it looks in the current version. And here's what the combo scaling looks like in the current version. 2,990, so a little bit of a damage loss here from that very short sequence already. Again, the idea here being that if you are successful using a super to reversal like this and you're able to extend a combo, it's not as rewarding, which means that defensive uses like this don't swing the game as much as they did before. There's one final system mechanic change to note as well in the patch notes that has to do with the block button. On Wake Up Recovery and Mid-Air Recovery, if you press the block button while inputting attack, the attack will be prioritized without the blocking. This is namely probably just to deal with a couple of unintended OSs that might exist where you could press the block button and still guard if the opponent was swinging at you, but then maybe you could swing out as well. It's not really one thing that I'm particularly aware of abuse cases with, but any sort of block button shenanigans aren't really something that has been allowed to exist in the game as they are uncovered and discovered. I'd appreciate more context as to what this particular change was meant to target in the first place. With the system mechanics covered, I briefly wanted to share my thoughts on it and what I think it's going to do to the overall metagame for Granblue Fantasy versus Rising. There's a lot of damage scaling nerfs applied to these changes, which overall is going to slow down the pace of the matches, while also making it so that it's not as back and forth as it was before, because some of these changes do take place within a defensive context where, if you throw out a Hail Mary ultimate skill, you could get tons of damage before. If you went for a mash Brave counter OS, and then you were able to convert it from a mash into a Raging Strike and Chain, you're not as rewarded as you were before. So there's a lot of less damage coming out from the system mechanics overall, while a couple of quality of life things that make sure that everybody is kind of on the same playing field as well, with what you see with the cancel into a close medium from a close range 6/6L. I do think that with a bunch of the buffs that are going to be coming to a lot of the characters, that a lot of this patch feels like they're trying to de-emphasize some of the system mechanics in terms of dominating the pace of the game, while making it so that the characters' toolkits themselves have a better chance of standing out and diversifying why you play the cast. There are a couple of unfortunate victims, in my opinion, of this patch, though. I kind of don't like to see that fuzzies are getting nerfed, but who knows? Maybe they deemed that it was going to be too much going forward, especially with like a huge new character being introduced, right? Who could be like maybe double fuzzied or something like that. As well as I do kind of worry a bit because Brave Counter has not been touched at all, and that has by far been the most popular way of spending the Brave Point system in this game. And now that there's all this de-incentivization around using Raging Strike as a combo extender, I feel like we're going to see less of that in the game and more often than not, people will be spending their Brave Points on a defensive use for that mechanic. Obviously, there will still be situations where you're going to Raging Strike to extend a combo. I'm not so sure if their vision of trying to incentivize using Raging Strike as a guard crush mechanic is going to last, just because it is still the same startup. It is still considered a reactable tool, but maybe it will be more viable as characters will have more things to threaten with their toolkits being buffed as well. It's something that we're going to have to see, but I'm kind of excited because this is definitely going to be a different game, and now it's time to move on to the character-specific changes that I'll be rolling out one at a time over the next couple of days. I appreciate you all watching. See you in the future videos.